What if I told you one ambitious railway project almost plunged an entire nation into financial ruin? This may sound like an exaggerated tale, but it's a true story of how a grand vision turned into an economic nightmare. The railway in question was supposed to be a shining example of national progress, an engineering marvel that would connect remote regions, boost trade, and drive economic growth. But instead, it spiraled out of control, leading the country to the brink of bankruptcy. The scale of the project was enormous, involving billions in investments, years of construction, and the hopes of an entire nation riding on its success. And yet, in the end, it was a story of failed ambition, financial chaos, and broken promises. What went wrong? Why did a project designed to bring prosperity almost destroy the very nation it was meant to serve? And more importantly, how did such an incredible venture, filled with so much promise, end up as one of the most catastrophic economic failures in history? Stick around as we dive into this forgotten piece of history and explore the railway that almost cost a nation everything. In the early days of this ambitious railway project, the motivations were clear. Politicians saw an opportunity to transform the nation's infrastructure, positioning themselves as champions of progress. They promised voters that this railway would usher in a new era of economic prosperity, connecting rural areas to bustling urban centers and making the country a player on the global stage. Economically, the project was touted as a golden ticket, a chance to unlock new trade routes, stimulate regional development, and create thousands of jobs. For many, it was a beacon of hope in an otherwise stagnant economy. The technological ambition behind the railway was equally impressive. Engineers and visionaries promised a feat of modern engineering that would rival the greatest railways in the world. The design included cutting-edge technology, state-of-the-art trains, and an unprecedented railway route that would traverse treacherous terrain and dense forests. It was meant to be a symbol of national pride, an awe-inspiring achievement that would stand as a testament to the country's potential. But behind the grand vision were powerful figures, politicians, financiers, and engineers, all of whom had their own reasons for pushing forward with the project. The politicians sought to secure their place in history, while financiers saw a way to reap huge returns on the investments. Yet, it wasn't long before cracks began to appear. The costs of construction soared, and the promises of grandeur began to collide with the harsh realities of financing such an ambitious endeavor. The construction of the railway was an ordeal. The route was mapped out across some of the most difficult terrain imaginable: mountainous regions, dense forests, and vast swamps. Workers faced extreme weather conditions, dangerous landslides, and the constant risk of disease. Every day brought new challenges, but the project continued, driven by political pressure and the ever-growing hope that things would eventually come together. As the construction teams plowed forward, costs began to spiral out of control. The initial budget quickly became a distant memory, and new issues arose at every turn: engineering problems, labor shortages, and delays that caused even more financial strain. With each passing month, the project became a deeper money pit, and the scope of the work expanded. Promises of cutting-edge technology and a fast-track timeline gave way to compromises, with workmen struggling to maintain the quality of the railway infrastructure as costs grew. Public opinion began to shift as well. What started as a highly anticipated project that had the nation's full support quickly turned into a symbol of failure. The initial excitement gave way to growing skepticism. Newspaper headlines criticized the rising debt, questioned the viability of the project, and highlighted the increasing number of accidents and mishaps. People began to wonder if the railway would ever be finished, and if it was even worth finishing at all. The once optimistic mood turned dark as the nation's future seemed to hang in the balance. As the project trudged on, the financial disaster only deepened. What had started as an optimistic venture turned into a ticking time bomb for the nation's economy. Costs spiraled far beyond the original estimates. What was once projected to be a manageable infrastructure project quickly became an unsustainable financial burden. The government, eager to see the project completed, borrowed heavily from international lenders, relying on loans that seemed manageable in the early days. But as delays mounted and costs continued to rise, the borrowed money piled up, and the interest on the loans became crippling. The country's national treasury, once robust, was stretched to the breaking point. To make matters worse, there was a severe lack of oversight. Mismanagement and corruption plagued the project from the very start. Contracts were awarded without proper bidding processes, and funds meant for construction were often misdirected or siphoned off into private pockets. The unrealistic planning of the railway's scale and scope became evident, but by then it was too late to halt the momentum. The government's blind pursuit of completion only exacerbated the financial strain, and the weight of the debt began to suffocate the nation. The consequences of this financial catastrophe were widespread. The economy, already fragile, now teetered on the brink of collapse. Large corporations faced bankruptcy due to the domino effect of delayed payments and financial instability. Unemployment soared as contractors and workers were left with unpaid wages, and the ripple effect hit countless small businesses that relied on the construction boom. Public discontent grew as citizens took to the streets, angry at the government for mismanaging their money and forcing them to shoulder the burden of the project's failure. As the dust settled, the once promising railway project was either abandoned or completed at a monumental cost, depending on who you ask. In some areas, sections of the railway were left half-built, existing as ghostly reminders of the country's failed ambitions. In other places, what had been constructed was completed with the hope that at least some benefits could be salvaged from the wreckage. But the damage was done. The country was left with a massive debt that would take decades to pay off, and an infrastructure project that never delivered on its initial promises. The long-term effects of the railway's failure were profound. The nation's economy struggled to recover, and the scars from the financial catastrophe lingered for years. The debt burden became a constant weight, limiting the government's ability to invest in other critical areas. Social programs were cut, public services were reduced, and the general populace suffered from the fallout of this failed endeavor. Yet, despite the devastation, there were lessons to be learned. Over time, the nation did begin to recover, but the scars of the railway project remained a cautionary tale. Future leaders took note of the mistakes made: mismanagement, lack of proper planning, and overambitious promises, and began implementing stricter oversight and more realistic expectations for future projects. While the railway failed to live up to its vision, its legacy was not entirely one of loss. It served as a pivotal lesson in the dangers of unchecked ambition and the importance of sustainable financial planning. Ultimately, the nation's recovery wasn't just from the economic fallout, but also from the lessons learned from this catastrophic mistake. Today, the forgotten railway project is viewed through a lens of mixed emotions. For some, it remains a cautionary tale, an example of how unchecked ambition and grandiose promises can lead an entire nation to the brink of disaster. It stands as a symbol of hubris, reminding us of the dangers of overextending resources in pursuit of national glory. Many see it as a tragic failure, a project that could have changed the country for the better, but instead drained its resources and left a legacy of debt and regret. However, in some circles, there's a more optimistic interpretation of the project's legacy. Some view the failed railway as a stepping stone for future infrastructure projects. They argue that while it was disastrous at the time, the lessons learned from this venture paved the way for better planned, more sustainable projects in the future. The mistakes made here, whether it be an overestimation of costs, lack of proper oversight, or the consequences of relying too heavily on debt, are now part of the toolkit that helps governments and businesses avoid similar mistakes. In terms of the physical remains, the railway itself is mostly a forgotten relic. In some areas, abandoned tracks and overgrown construction sites still serve as eerie reminders of what was supposed to be a transformative project. Other sections, where construction was completed, have become a part of local history, occasionally drawing tourists or historians interested in understanding how such a grand plan went so awry. However, for the most part, the remains have faded into obscurity, forgotten ruins in a nation that has moved on from its past mistakes. So what can we take away from the story of this ambitious railway project? At its core, it's a reminder of the fine line between visionary ambition and reckless overreach. The project's legacy is one of lessons learned about the importance of financial prudence, the need for realistic planning, and the dangers of political overpromises. This story highlights how even the most well-intentioned ideas can unravel when there's a failure to manage resources wisely and keep expectations grounded in reality. The tale of this railway is a warning about the seductive allure of grandeur and the tragic consequences of mismanagement. It serves as a reminder that, even with the best of intentions, ambition must always be tempered by caution and sound judgment. And now we must ask, could something like this happen again in today's world of mega infrastructure projects? With the rise of massive international initiatives and the increasing complexity of global finance, is it possible that another nation might fall victim to the same mistakes? One thing is certain: the story of this forgotten railway will continue to serve as a lesson for generations to come.